April 9, 1964. 3:18 p.m. The spring sun didn't warm Harlem yet. It only made the sidewalks brighter, so everything felt exposed. School had just let out. Kids spilled onto 125th Street with book bags bouncing, trading jokes, chasing nickels and candy the way they always did. Margaret Johnson walked a step behind her friend, keeping her head down the way her mother taught her. She dressed like a normal teenage girl, neat coat, clean shoes, hair done right. If you didn't know her, you'd never guess her father's name had weight in every back room from Harlem to downtown Manhattan. And that's exactly why the man chose her. A dark sedan rolled along the curb too slowly. Not lost. Hunting. The passenger window slid down an inch and stayed there, like an eye half open. Margaret felt it before she saw it. That quiet shift in the air when strangers stopped being random. Then a man stepped out. Italian. Mid-30s. Overcoat too expensive for Harlem. Hair slicked back like he practiced in a mirror. He moved fast and polite at the same time, like a predator pretending to be a gentleman. "Excuse me," he said, blocking her path. Margaret tried to step around him. He stepped with her. "I just need a minute," he said, smiling. "Your father and I—" She froze at the word father. "Move," she said, but her voice came out smaller than she wanted. The man's smile thinned. "Don't make this hard." And then he did the one thing that turned ordinary into legend. He grabbed her wrist. Not hard enough to leave bruises. Hard enough to make a point. The kind of grip men use when they want you to understand you're not the one deciding anymore. Margaret's friend screamed. A few kids stopped. A couple of grown men looked over and kept walking like they'd learned long ago that trouble charges interest. Margaret yanked back. "Let go of me." The man leaned close, his breath smelling like cigarettes and mint. "You're coming for a ride. Your father is going to listen to my bosses for once." Margaret's stomach dropped. So it wasn't random. It was leverage. She twisted again. His grip tightened. He started pulling her toward the sedan. That's when the first punch landed. A Harlem man in a work jacket came out of nowhere and hit the Italian so clean it snapped his head sideways. The grip loosened. Margaret stumbled back. The Italian didn't fall. He recovered fast, angry now, reaching inside his coat. Two more men appeared, not running, moving with purpose. One stepped between Margaret and the sedan. The other grabbed the Italian's wrist before he could pull whatever he was reaching for. The Italian looked around, confused, and for the first time his confidence cracked. "Who the hell are you?" he hissed. The Harlem man in the work jacket leaned in and spoke so quietly only the Italian could hear. "You don't touch children in this neighborhood." The Italian's eyes flicked to Margaret again, then to the men surrounding him, then to the crowd that was suddenly paying attention. "Move," he snapped, trying to step away. He didn't get to. The second man, taller, colder, pressed something hard into the Italian's ribs through his coat. Not a gun he could see, but he felt the message anyway. "You're coming with us," the taller man said. The Italian laughed once, shaky. "You don't know what you're doing." The tall man's expression didn't change. "Oh, we do." They guided him toward the sedan like it belonged to them now. The Italian resisted just enough to look tough. Not enough to die on a sidewalk. Margaret stood there shaking, watching the car door close on the man who tried to drag her away. Then she heard the sentence that made the whole moment turn from scary to terrifying. The taller man looked back at her, gentle for the first time. "Margaret," he said, "we're taking him to your father." Her chest tightened. "My father?" The man nodded once. "Yes, Miss Johnson." By 3:40 p.m., that Italian enforcer was no longer a stranger with a plan. He was a mistake being delivered. And by sunset, the five families would learn a rule they thought only applied to them. Family is off limits. By the mid-1960s, Harlem wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a prize. Not because it was rich, because it wasn't, but because poor people still gambled, still paid rent, still bought drinks, still played numbers with nickels and dimes that stacked into real money when you controlled the flow. The Italian mob understood that math. They always had. What they didn't understand was Harlem's other currency, respect. Ellsworth, Bumpy, Johnson had built his power in a way outsiders never fully grasped. He wasn't just feared. He was relied on. When families couldn't make rent, he quietly covered it. When cops bullied black shop owners, he made phone calls. When slumlords raised rent without fixing heat, somebody from Bumpy's circle had a conversation the slumlord never forgot. To the 5 families, that was an insult. Power was supposed to come from fear, not loyalty. From control, not community. So they tried every angle. First, business pressure. Then political pressure. Then pressure through Bumpy's own men. Offers that sounded like opportunity and ended like betrayal. None of it worked. Because Bumpy played chess while most men were still arguing over the rules of checkers. But in those years, a particular crew downtown got impatient. They weren't bosses with old-school discipline. They were climbers. Men who wanted promotion and didn't mind breaking the code if it meant moving faster. And those men started saying a dangerous sentence. If Bumpy won't listen, we make him listen. The problem with that sentence is it always points toward family. Margaret Johnson was not a gangster's daughter in the way the movies show it. She wasn't riding in fancy cars with bodyguards on every side. She didn't carry herself like royalty. Bumpy and his wife had fought hard to keep her life normal: school, friends, church, small freedoms. Harlem already watched them enough. But normal is a thin shield when powerful men decide you're useful. 4 weeks, an Italian enforcer named Sal Knuckles Marino had been gathering quiet details. Which block Margaret walked. Which day she stayed late. What time she got out. Which friend she walked with. Not because he was smart, but because nobody had stopped him. He didn't know her name at first. He only knew she was a teenage girl connected to Bumpy's world. And in Sal's mind, a teenage girl wasn't a person. She was a lever. He figured he'd grab her quick, push her into a car, make a call, and vanish. He figured Harlem would look away the way people often do when they're tired and scared. He figured wrong. Because Bumpy's Real defense wasn't a gun. It was a neighborhood. The man in the work jacket who threw the punch? He wasn't random. He was a maintenance worker who collected numbers slips for Bumpy on the side. The taller man who knew Margaret's name? That was Junie, one of Bumpy's trusted hands, who'd been keeping distance without being seen. Bumpy didn't lock his family away. He did something smarter. He made sure Harlem itself was watching. When Junie delivered Sal Marino to Small's paradise, Bumpy was already waiting. Not pacing. Not raging. Sitting calmly as if he'd expected the knock. Sal was brought into a back room that smelled like cigars and old wood. He tried to stand tall until he saw Bumpy's eyes. Not angry. Disappointed. That look broke tougher men than fists ever could. Bumpy spoke softly. "You grabbed a child." Sal licked his lips. "I didn't know." "You didn't know what?" Bumpy asked, still calm. "Her name? Or the rules?" Sal's jaw tightened. "My bosses want a meeting. They want a piece of Harlem. You've been difficult." Bumpy nodded once, like he was hearing the weather report. "And you thought touching my family would make me easy." Sal stared at the floor. He wasn't brave now. He was calculating, trying to figure out what kind of death he was about to receive. Bumpy leaned forward. "Here's the part you don't understand," he said. "If you had taken her, you would not have lived long enough to spend the money they promised you." Sal's head snapped up. "I wasn't doing it for money." Bumpy's voice stayed flat. "That makes you even dumber." He stood, slow and deliberate. "Call your bosses," Bumpy said. Sal hesitated. "They won't." Bumpy cut him off. "You'll call. You'll tell them you made contact. You'll tell them you have leverage. And you'll ask for a sit-down tonight." Sal swallowed. "Why would I do that?" Bumpy smiled, just barely. "Because you want to leave this room breathing." Sal realized what was happening too late. He wasn't a kidnapper now. He was bait. At 8:06 p.m., the call went out through the old channels: mutual businessmen, bartenders with good memory, drivers who heard too much. A sit-down was being arranged. Neutral ground. No cops. No chaos. Just a table and consequences. Sal Marino sat in the corner of the back room, wrists loose, but watched, sweating through his collar. Junie stood behind him like a shadow with patience. Bumpy didn't interrogate him for hours. He didn't beat him. That would have been emotional. Sloppy. Instead, Bumpy made calls. One to a lawyer who handled property and contracts, because war was expensive and paperwork was cheaper. One to a councilman who liked Harlem votes and hated downtown headlines. One to a detective who owed Bumpy money and hated internal affairs more than he loved the badge. And one to a woman Bumpy trusted to speak for the community, because what happened on 125th wasn't just personal. It was public. By 10:41 p.m., the meeting was set, a private dining room at a restaurant on the edge of Harlem, where both sides could arrive without looking like they were trespassing. At 11:02 p.m., two Italian men walked in first. Not bosses, captains. Men sent to talk tough without risking the real names. They took seats without greeting. Bumpy entered alone. Not because he lacked protection. Because walking in alone was protection. It told everyone in the room he believed the room belonged to rules, not bullets. A captain with a heavy ring on his finger leaned back. "Johnson," he said, like the name tasted bitter. "We heard there was an incident." "Bumpy Saturday, you heard right." The second captain smirked. "Nobody's perfect. Things happen." Bumpy looked at him for a long second. "Things don't happen. Men choose." The captain's smile faded. "You holding one of our guys?" Bumpy nodded toward the corner. Junie guided Sal forward like a prop. Sal tried to speak. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. His courage stayed on 125th Street with his plan. The first captain frowned. "Sal?" Sal swallowed. "They stopped me." Bumpy spoke over him. "He put hands on my daughter." The second captain shrugged. "Then maybe you should have kept her out of the street." The room went cold. Bumpy's eyes hardened in a way that made even seasoned criminals shift in their seats. "You don't get to say that," Bumpy replied. "Not after you sent your man to grab her like luggage." The first captain raised a hand, calming. "We're not here to argue feelings. We're here to talk business. Harlem is business." Bumpy nodded slowly. "Good. Then let's talk business." He placed a folder on the table and slid it forward. Inside were photographs, written statements, and a clean description of what happened on 125th, names of witnesses, names of shop owners, the bus line number that stopped near the curb. The second captain stared at it, suspicious. "What is this?" Bumpy's voice stayed level. "It's what goes to the newspapers at 9 a.m. if you don't fix what you broke." The first captain's face tightened. "You threatening to snitch?" Bumpy didn't flinch. "I'm threatening to expose. There's a difference. You want to pull family into business? Then we let the world see what kind of businessman you are." The second captain scoffed. "The world doesn't care about Harlem." Bumpy leaned forward. "The world cares about a white mobster grabbing a black teenage girl in broad daylight. Especially right now. Especially in this city. You think politicians want that headline? You think cops want that heat? You think your bosses want to explain why their people are touching children?" Silence. The first captain glanced at Sal, then back at Bumpy. "What do you want?" Bumpy spoke like he'd already decided hours ago. "First, you deliver an apology. Not to me. To my wife. To my daughter. In person." The second captain laughed once, sharp. "You want an Italian captain to apologize to?" Bumpy's stare cut him off. "Yes." The first captain exhaled through his nose. "And second, Harlem stays off your maps. No collectors testing corners. Only messages near schools. No men watching my building like it belongs to you." The first captain's jaw worked. "And your numbers? Your money? You stay in your lane too." Bumpy nodded. "I've been in my lane. You keep trying to drive through it." The second captain leaned in, voice lower. "And what about Sal? He's the one who did it." Bumpy looked at Sal like he was considering whether mercy was still on the table. "Sal lives," Bumpy said. "But he leaves New York tonight. He doesn't work Harlem, he doesn't work Brooklyn, he doesn't work anywhere near my family ever again." Sal's eyes widened. He hadn't expected to hear the word lives. The first captain sat back. "You're asking a lot." Bumpy's reply was quiet. "You already took a lot when you put hands on my child." The first captain stared at the folder again, doing the math. Exposure meant heat. Heat meant cops. Cops meant money bleeding. And money was the only language everyone at that table truly spoke. Fine, he said finally. You'll get your apology. And Sal disappears. Bumpy didn't celebrate. He just nodded, as if the outcome had never been in doubt. Then he added the final sentence, the one that turned the sit-down from negotiation into warning. And if anyone downtown ever tries to touch my family again, Bumpy said, there won't be another sit-down. April 10, 1964. 9:12 a.m. The next morning, Harlem woke up with the kind of rumor that traveled faster than church bells. They tried to snatch Bumpy's daughter. No, they didn't. They did on 125th. And he lived. Barely. At 9:12 a.m., a black car stopped outside a small beauty shop that Margaret's mother visited every other week. It wasn't a dramatic location. That was the point. Real power didn't always announce itself with spotlights. Sometimes it showed up quietly where people could witness it and remember. Two Italian captains stepped out. No smiles. No swagger. They walked like men carrying a task they hated. Bumpy was already there, standing near the doorway, hands relaxed at his sides. His wife stood beside him, composed, dressed clean, eyes sharp. Margaret stood a half step behind her mother, face pale but steady. The captains stopped in front of them. For a moment, nobody spoke. Cars passed. A man swept a storefront. A woman carrying groceries slowed down, sensing something heavy in the air. Then the first captain did what he'd been ordered to do. He looked at Margaret. I'm sorry, he said, each word forced. What happened yesterday should not have happened. Margaret didn't respond. She didn't need to. The apology wasn't for her comfort. It was for the record. The captain turned to Bumpy's wife. And ma'am, I apologize to you as well. No one will approach your family again. Bumpy's wife held his gaze like she could see every ugly thought behind his eyes. Make sure of it, she said calmly. The second captain swallowed, then spoke too, quicker, eager to finish. Our people will stay out of your personal business. Bumpy finally spoke. You mean my family, he corrected. The second captain nodded stiffly. Yes. Your family. Bumpy let the moment sit. Let the neighborhood witness it. Let the lesson settle into the cracks of the sidewalk. Then he stepped closer, voice low so only they could hear. Tell your bosses something, Bumpy said. Harlem isn't just territory. It's home. And home is where men get buried when they forget manners. The captains didn't answer. They just nodded once and returned to their car, faces tight with humiliation. They drove away. And just like that, the five families had done something they almost never did. They apologized publicly in Harlem. Not because they became good men. Because they finally understood what kind of price Bumpy Johnson was willing to pay. Sal Marino was gone that night, put on a bus with a new job offer in a different city and a warning he'd never forget. He didn't die. In some ways, that was worse. He had to live with the knowledge that he'd grabbed the wrong girl on the wrong street, and the whole neighborhood saw him get turned into a message. Margaret went back to school. But she didn't walk the same way afterward. None of them did. Her mother held her a little tighter. Harlem mothers looked a little harder at unfamiliar cars. And Bumpy? He didn't throw a parade. He didn't brag. He simply tightened the rule around his world. Family stays out of business. Because once you let men use your loved ones as leverage, you don't just lose peace, you lose the right to call anything yours. People would tell the story for years, sometimes changing details, sometimes adding dramatic touches the way Harlem legends always grow. But the core stayed true, because the core was the only part that mattered. An Italian enforcer tried to make a point by grabbing a black teenage girl in public. He didn't know who her father was. And by the next morning, the whole Mafia knew exactly who she belonged to, and what the line looked like when it was drawn in Harlem. If you want more Harlem stories like this, stories about power, loyalty, and the rules nobody writes down but everybody learns, subscribe and stay with us. And tell me in the comments, if you were Bumpy, would you have let Sal live? Or would you have made a different kind of example?